Jayne, I'll hand over to you for intro.
Great, thanks, Gillian. Well, welcome again. I'll keep it brief. I'm Jayne, coach of the Isle of Wight. Gillian is based just outside London, aren't you, Gillian?
I am
Yeah.
not far from London.
Yeah. I have no idea where Tim is. Perhaps we can check in with Tim where Tim is.
Reaching for the unmute. So I'm based in Jersey. I'm a coach, mentor, and mediator, which is always quite interesting because they are different roles. So it's an interesting part of the book, examining those different roles.
Jersey, wow.
Yeah. And Kim, I do know where you're based, but perhaps you could share that with particularly with Tim and Clare.
Sure. I'm based in the Netherlands, in The Hague.
Oh.
So it's beautifully international.
Yeah.
And Clare, I know that you are based over in the New Forest in Hampshire.
I am, yeah, on the South Coast, where it's just started to pee it down. To put it less than delicately. I suddenly thought, oh, hang on, I'm being recorded. Can't say that, but I've just said it.
It'll come my way. It'll be probably by the time I've left the meeting and out for my walk, it's probably over on the Isle of Wight. So I'm just going to say a few brief words just about Clare, just to introduce her for those of you who may not know Clare's background. I understand that Clare's been coaching for at least 20 years and been running your own business since 2015, Clare Norman Coaching Associates. And you specialise in transition and leadership coaching alongside mentor coaching and coaching supervision. And I understand you're the go-to person for people looking for mentorship. And you have this laser focus on mindset shifts, which I think certainly comes through in the book. And you have a great mission across all your work to encourage leaders to put people and the planet before profits, which I thought was fabulous as well. And as I said, you live in the New Forest, Hampshire. I'm curious to know more about your bloodhound, but maybe another day.
Yeah. Come and see her one time, Jayne.
Yes, we're not too far away.
Not far away.
Not too far away. So we'll go on to the format of the session and get stuck in, as you say, time being of the essence.
So relaxed format. We've got small numbers here, so I'm just going to propose we jump in and ask and just take turns. Jayne and I will ask some stuff on behalf of some other people, but this is really your chance to follow up those queries that emerged as you read the book. A chance for you to ask Clare to expand on the things that were stirring in your mind, your heart, and your gut. And a chance to share things that maybe resonated with you, that seemed familiar, that you're like, yes, I think that might be me. And a time to ask any of those questions that have been bubbling up, of which I'm sure there have been lots and lots. So that's it. Let's dive in. And who would love to go with the first question?
Okay.
So my question might be slightly controversial, apologies, Clare, but right. I did the Arts and Science of Coaching training with Tracy last year. So it was pretty fresh in my mind. And she used the concept that you talk about in your introduction around the thinking muscle, and that your coachee, you need to consider them this creative whole. And I kept thinking, I'm listening to my training from last year all over and over again. So I was just wondering just how close you and Tracy happen to be.
Oh, well, that's a good question. We're not. I know of Tracy, but we haven't. I'm not even sure whether we've exchanged emails. We probably have in the past. I mean, I have read her book that she wrote. It came out in lockdown, I think. So yes, we are both aligned with the International Coaching Federation, so that guides both of us, which would be probably why you're hearing something similar, which is good.
Yeah, no, it was just fascinating, and It was also one of the reasons why it took me a little bit of a while to get into the book, because I kind of thought, oh, this is some more of the theory I was going through last year. But once I got into the mindset shifts, it was really fun.
Yeah, good, because yeah, it's when we start looking at our mindsets that it is no longer theory. It's absolutely our own stuff, and we need to do something about those. So
okay, thanks.
Yes, thanks, Kim.
Maybe separated at birth and you don't know it.
Maybe.
Maybe. I think the ICF influence will have something to do with it as well, definitely. Okay, what else have we got? Should we throw one in from the members who are not here, Jayne?
Yeah. So at our first book club meeting, that was a couple of weeks ago, what came up strongly from the coaches, and more than one of them, was giving ourselves permission, the magic P word, to do things we thought we shouldn't or we couldn't. So we wondered what your thoughts were, Clare, on giving ourselves permission, as I think we're all feeling it's often easier said than done.
And only you can do that for yourselves. Nothing I say here will give you that permission. Although I do say at the beginning of the book something about, you know, I give you permission to make changes in your coaching, because you know, that comes out of transactional analysis, that people do sometimes need to get that permission from externally, because they're not giving it to themselves. But at the same time, I'm thinking, you know, you listening to me on this recording is not going to give you that permission. So you need to figure out, each of you need to figure out for you personally, which are the mindsets that you need to give yourself permission for, which are the ones where you need to stop listening to your mother's voice or your father's voice or your carer's voice or your teacher's voice or your manager's voice or whoever's voice it is, because they extolled certain things that are not right in the coaching arena and do not serve the people that we work with. So we need to stop listening to them and start listening to our own selves and our own and shifting our own mindsets, and only we can give ourselves permission to do that. But yeah, great question.
I totally agree. Yeah, thank you, Clare. That's a great answer as well.
I think as I listened to you say that just now, I'm a pragmatist, so the thing I'll take from that is very much thinking, is a reminder that this is a different context in which I'm doing the thing.
Yeah.
While the original shift may be still appropriate in some of the other life contexts, work contexts, in this work, it's not the right context for it. And I think even just that little thing just popped into my head, just listening to you then, that I was like, gosh, that already begins to free me, for myself to know it's the different context. That's one of the things.
Yes, exactly right, Gillian. That you know, let's take interruptions. That's the one that people always gravitate towards. Yeah, it would still be rude to interrupt somebody in a normal conversation, but it's not in coaching, as long as we think about, am I interrupting old thinking, or am I interrupting new thinking? If I'm interrupting new thinking, I'm doing the wrong thing. I should absolutely not be interrupting new thinking. But if they're going over old ground, then simply checking out with them whether it's useful to them to say that stuff out loud is absolutely our job. But we wouldn't do that in normal conversation.
Yeah. Oh, Tim's got his hand up. Go for it, Tim.
I am guilty at times of what the ICF will call double barrel questions. Do you think this, that, or the other? One of my thoughts is that if you only ask one question at a time, the process is linear. And I have found, it may not necessarily be good, but I have found that sometimes the double barrel or triple barrel question presents a crossroads. And I find it really interesting which of those roads the client chooses for themselves to pursue. So how do you feel about presenting junctions as opposed to following a path?
So first thing I would say is asking one question at a time is not necessarily linear. So if we're asking solution questions that are helping people to get to a solution, then that might feel like it's a straight line. But actually, if we're asking questions that are more to do with emotion and feelings and beliefs and values, that's going to take them deeper. And that's not necessarily logical and linear, because there's a lot of stuff to unpack in people's own mindsets and limiting beliefs, etc. So I'd say that first, but then in answer to your actual question about offering them those crossroads, well, that might be the crossroad that I see, but they might see 5 other exits off of that roundabout. And if I don't offer those 5 other exits, then that's not useful to them. So that's why a more open question that enables them to identify what the exits might be or what the choice points are. What do you see as the choice points at this point? You might say, as an open question. So they might, quite often, people will answer that with an either or, because that's why they're stuck. They're in a dilemma of, do I go this way? Do I go that way? They're both as bad as each other in their own way. I don't want to choose either of them. So there is something about a third and a fourth and a fifth option. But we can do different things to help them to figure those out for themselves, which might be options that we couldn't possibly have thought of on their behalf, because our life is not their life, our context is not their context, etc., etc. So, for example, one exercise I use if they seem like they're in this either or space is to ask them to take a couple of pieces of paper that represent the either and the or, and to go and to place those on the floor somewhere, and then ask them to take another piece of paper that's representative of a third option, ask them to place that on the floor. They don't need to know at this point what it is, and ask them to take a piece of paper that represents a fourth option, and then ask them to go and step on each one. And they will know what the third and the fourth options are as soon as they step onto them. And then they will be able to inhabit them and decide, oh, I like this bit of this one, and if I could have this and this, then that gives me a fifth option. So it's really in helping them to, well, build that thinking muscle for themselves, as I think it was Jayne talked about, and to start to feel that sense of agency for themselves, that I can figure this out for myself. I don't need Tim as my crutch. I mean, yes, they need you to be asking questions, but we don't want them to become dependent on us. And so when we give those options as we see them, that cuts off the fourth and the fifth option, for example.
I think you're absolutely right. And indeed, maybe even the choice of the word options was wrong, because options indicates an endpoint, whereas paths or explorations is a continuation of the journey.
Yes.
So in my parlance, perhaps it's to offer different paths to pursue, but then your point is still valid.
Still valid.
It's up to them to identify if there are different paths to pursue or not.
Yes.
Not for me to necessarily provoke that awareness or thinking.
Yeah, and the best way that I found to do that is to ask them, what do you know now that you didn't know at the beginning of this session? They say what they know. And then I'll say, and so where do we go next? So they identify the path that they want to explore next. based on what they've discovered. You might think, oh, well, you're not thinking about this over here or this over here, but actually they are thinking about what is most relevant for them, given their context, their personality, etc. And it's their choice, their agency. But yeah, thanks, Tim. Great question.
I'll ask another one from someone who's not here. So what have we got? We've got unlearning assumptions, beliefs, ways of being is central to your book. Because actually this book is kind of not, it is about coaching, but it's not really just about coaching. It's about so many things we've just learned, and it's about us full stop.
Yep.
The question is, though, how does someone reach an optimal state within themselves to unlearn and enable relearning and new learning?
Oh, what a great question. So the first thing I would say is that we need to approach it with a growth mindset, as Carol Dweck talks about. If we come at coaching with a fixed mindset that I need to tick off the competencies, then, you know, we're going to think, well, I'm good enough, I'm there, I've got my credential, I don't need to do any more. Whereas actually with a growth mindset, we approach things as though there is always more to be learning, always more to be unlearning. So even the people who are master certified coaches are always unlearning and relearning. And I do think the majority of coaches have a growth mindset, but I also noticed that when they come for mentor coaching, it's a scary thing to put their coaching under the spotlight with somebody else who is giving them some feedback. It feels quite vulnerable to do that. And for some people, if they think it's fine, this is just a tick box exercise, that's the fixed mindset. And they're actually going to really struggle with mentor coaching and raising their game for the purposes of credentialing or for the purposes of simply raising their game. So I think that's the main thing I would say, is we need to discover our own growth mindset and get out of our own way. We are our own worst enemy at the end of the day.
I think as well, like one of the things I love about coaching is like I'm sure I learn something from my clients in every single session, and that can be something about myself.
Yeah,
it can be something about me and me coaching, but also it's just about me, full stop. So I think for me it's a non-stop learning. Like there's not an end point with this.
No,
but it's enjoying that as opposed to beating ourselves up and thinking that we're supposed to be somewhere.
Yes, yeah, we're all on a journey. Yeah, there is no destination, honestly. I mean, even you know, if you think that MCC, let's say, is the destination, you're fooling yourself. It's not, because there's still so much more to learn, even at mastery. Because that's what masters do, is they keep learning and they keep sharpening their edge over and over and over and over and over again. And I think that wherever we are in our journey, we can be doing that.
Lovely, beautiful. Who else would like to ask something next?
Tim?
Well, if provoked, I have another.
Go on.
I really liked a section of your thinking, which I called, my pejorative term, Groundhog Day.
Okay.
That approach by which you go into any coaching conversation completely fresh, completely open, and almost, my parlance rather than yours, disregarding what may have happened before or what might happen next, but just being in the moment. And I have had some very rich, and I hope for my clients, fruitful conversations. But in the back of my mind is the ICF idea that we should have an outcome and measures of success. Indeed, it's quite specific in terms of the criteria. And if you're meeting somebody over a series of coaching conversations, my personal experience is the presenting problem on session 1 is nothing like the conversation you have on session 4 if you're any good at rapport and coaching. And therefore, the ability to draw on previous observations, previous experiences, to provoke awareness in the clients of what has changed through those coaching sessions is almost the antithesis of Groundhog Day. And yet I value Groundhog Day. What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. Gosh, there's so much wrapped up in that. So where to start with unbundling it? I do think it's a both and. I think it's coming into each session without looking back at the notes. And if you did take notes from last time, don't look back at them, because actually that person will have moved forward by the time they get into this new time and new space. They are a new person. They might, you know, like a snake, they might have shed some skin since last time, and there's no point us working with them with that old skin in mind. I'm full of metaphors, me. Excuse that one if you don't like it. So they come in a new skin. They come with new ways of seeing the world. They're in a different place. And so that starting afresh is really important, because we have no idea how they are arriving into this session. So that's one thing. But then the other thing you said about being able to notice patterns, that's important. That is important as well, to see patterns. But I think that's more about us being so fully present in every moment of the coaching that the patterns show up through our intuition, or you know, they're not things that we're writing in notes everywhere, because actually if we're writing notes, we're not fully present. So we can use what we know about them, as you say, to perhaps hold up a mirror to say, that sounds like something we were touching on in a previous session. What's shifted for you since then, or whatever it is, whatever the thing is that comes to mind, or I'm noticing over the times that we've been working together how much you bash yourself over the head, for example. What's that about? So that might be a pattern that we shine a light on for them if they choose to do some work on that. So then the other thing you said, and I'm not sure I understand how you're making a connection to it, between what that stuff about being fully present. You talked about the session agreements and how the ICF is absolutely clear that we need to be identifying what the session agreement is at the beginning of every single session. The reason we need to do that is because what they said they wanted at the beginning of the program will have shifted. And so we and they need to get really clear on what is it that we are working on today, not going back necessarily to those original goals, because if we have built that rapport with them, as you suggest, then they are going to show up with more vulnerability each time. They're going to go deeper. They're going to be discovering, oh no, it's not really that. It's this that I need to work on. But that means that we need to get really clear at the beginning of each session. What is it we are working on today? How will we know that you've got that by the time we finish today? How should we do this work together today? What's your sense of what we need to cover in order to get you from where you are now to where you want to be by the end? What's important to you about this? All of those good, solid contracting questions. Now, that doesn't mean that by the time they get halfway through the session, that session goal might have shifted again, in which case we recontract. But we need to know which path we're taking in the first place to get some riverbanks in place, if you like, so we know which way the river is flowing, because otherwise we're going to spend all our time grasping at what is this thing that we're really working on today, and then we don't necessarily get to where they most want to get to, the thing that matters most to them in that time.
I'm interested in that because, and I'm going to cite a very extreme example, but it's useful because I'm probably not as extreme as this. But Carl Rogers, in his books, referred to a case where the client would literally spend time with him in silence. And it turned out that his complete acceptance of that person in that moment, unconditional positive regard being a phrase that he's often associated with, he saw no difference in her in the sessions that they had together. But then when he examined what was happening on the outside, the experience was completely transformative of that person. That whole acceptance, that ability to hold that silence and let that person simply be. And I have had coaching conversations where I'm not clear where we've got to, but the client's really happy, where the client will sit there and go, that was fantastic. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not quite sure what we've done. And the absence of path or agenda set by me has allowed them to achieve something, but I couldn't possibly say we set out at the beginning of the meeting to achieve X, and that we progressed 3 steps closer to X, Y, or Z. I'm just there for them to have whatever conversation they want to have at the time that they want to have it in the context in which they feel. And this isn't contracting, or at least it doesn't feel like contracting to me.
So yeah, I mean, contracting is a big word, and it often conjures up a written contract and lawyerly contracts, all that kind of stuff, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about getting a sense between the two of you as to where it is that they want to get to. It's not where I think they need to get to. And there is something important at the end of helping them to identify what progress they've made today and what they're going to do with that progress. What have they learned about themselves that they can apply more broadly, etc. But I still may not really understand the impact of what's just happened, because there will have been stuff going on inside their body, for example, that they haven't expressed out loud. So I try not to worry myself in inverted commas about did we get what they said they wanted at the beginning, because they will have made progress, and progress begets progress, and that's really what's important to me in coaching, is that they move forward in some shape or form, whether that's resolving everything that they said at the beginning that they wanted, or whether actually they've shifted completely in what they now realize they wanted or needed. So it's something completely different, and that's okay, as long as we're checking in all of the time, making sure that they're getting what it is that they most want. And that's one of the things that the ICF is very hot on, is it's got to be their agenda. So they're the ones setting that goal at the beginning of a session, deciding what their measures of success are for that. And those measures are not necessarily actions or lists or plans. In fact, those are tend to be quite transactional. It's much more about who the person is becoming that we're aiming for. You know, if we want to enable them to experience transformation, it's not working on having a plan by the time they leave a session. It's working on it might be their confidence in themselves as they work the plan, or it might be something else about who they are being. And that's one of the things that has changed from the old competencies to the new competencies, is the ICF is really focusing now on who questions, not just what questions. And that's what makes a real difference in people being able to walk away with something that's much, much bigger than an action plan or a list of things to do or a next step. If we can work on the who. I don't know if that answers the question, Tim, but you're really stimulating some great thinking. Thank you.
I loved that. Who are they becoming, and who are they being now or ahead? And like that in itself is a wonderful question to ask.
Yeah.
But they kind of trying to ask the question to do with the competency, which is about what progress they've made. The who are you becoming now would be such a wonderful way to do it. I love that. I'm popping that in my pocket for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Lovely. What other questions are dying to be asked?
Yeah. One of the examples that really struck me was that one about coaching a Russian-speaking person with just a one-way translator. It really spoke to me, not necessarily in be comfortable with the unknown, because that I'm okay with, but I'm actually struggling with this idea of being a English-speaking person in the Netherlands, and can I dare to try and coach in Dutch? And so now you've got me thinking, wonder if it will work if I ask the questions in English and they reply to me in Dutch, because I understand Dutch fully. I'm just not that comfortable of doing my own thinking fast enough, and probably I'm a bit nervous about formulating a good solid coaching question in Dutch. So yeah,
you could certainly experiment with it, but my guess would be if they speak English as well, they will automatically reply to you in English because they've heard the question in English, and I suspect that will trigger their English language rather than their Dutch language. But it would make sense to try and play with it, because you know how sometimes somebody who has English as a second language can't quite find the words in English. And it doesn't matter if they can find the English words. If they can find the Dutch word, for example, doesn't matter if I know that Dutch word or not. They might think it's important for me to understand the Dutch word, but it's not. It's far more important that they understand what they're saying. And so even if it's to encourage them to, when they say they can't access a word in English, just encourage them to say the Dutch word, and it doesn't matter if you can't understand it. But yeah, there may be some people who are kind of the reverse of you, who can understand you speaking in English but don't have the confidence to say it in English. So you could try that, where they speak in Dutch and you speak in English. See what happens.
Okay.
It would be a bold experiment, I would say, and I imagine there would be lots and lots of learning in it about what kinds of questions to ask when you don't know the content. To simply be holding up the mirror to them about, oh, what was that heavy sigh, for
Mm.
example? Or, you know, if you see tears in their eyes, if those tears could speak, what would they say right now?
Mm.
Or, oh, you're using your hands a lot. What are your hands saying here? What's the meaning that you make of that?
Okay.
So any of those more process questions that don't have any content in them,
Mm.
that's what she was doing as she was coaching.
Mm. Okay. Okay. So
Kim,
really,
tell me how it goes. I am
okay. Will do. Thank you.
I think that's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I think that's also a fabulous reminder that there's so much insight coming our way in between us that isn't just the words that people use. You know, there's even the insight from within your own body and the feelings and sensations you have, and also the things that you notice, see, hear beyond the words, isn't it? It's just such a reminder of that.
Yeah, and that's where I think the competency listens actively is really shortchanging that whole thing, because we're not just listening with our ears and we're not just listening to the words, we're also listening to those little, you know, deep breaths, or watching the facial expressions, or whatever it is that, as you say, feeling something in my gut. That's all listening, but it's not listening with my ears. It's paying attention, I suppose, might be a better way.
Yeah.
But then that goes with coaching presence as well. You have those two tied in together.
Yeah, beyond the words. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? Who's got anything else or something else?
Could I very briefly just offer an experience on sort of content-free coaching? Very briefly. I was working with somebody and literally said, look, have you got a pen and a piece of paper? And they said, yeah, sure. Said, draw the first thing. So they drew something. Of course, I can't see what they've drawn.
Doesn't matter.
Okay. Now the next. I have no idea what they're drawing. And now the next. They looked up from the piece of paper and said, that's remarkable. How did you know?
Brilliant, brilliant. That's so cool. Yeah.
We're wizards.
Yes.
Jayne, should we have another one from one of the members who are not here?
Yes, yes. And this was a great question in our in the book club meetup, because we loved sharing our favorite childhood books. So we did this towards the beginning with introductions. But so Claire, what was or what is your favorite childhood book? And what does this book tell us about you?
Well, the one that I have come back to in adulthood is Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss.
I've got that.
Oh, yeah, it's gorgeous. And it's very coachy. It has a belief in you know, everybody is resourceful, creative, and whole, and can overcome obstacles in their way, and that we all forge our own path. So all of the stuff that I believe as a coach: choices, independence, etc., etc. So yeah, that's my favorite children's book.
I love that. Yeah. I'll go for another one from one of the just checking on time. We've got 10 minutes left. So there's a saying that everyone writes the book they need, or they needed. How true has this been for you so far? And is there still a book to be written that's not yet revealed itself?
Oh, multiple question there, I noticed, stacked. So yes, this was certainly a book that I needed as I was on my MCC application journey. because it was enabling me to see where I needed to shift mindsets in order to shift skill sets. So yes, another quote that I've heard is that a book will only be transformative for the readers if it has transformed the author first. So on a similar note, and I would certainly say that not only in the writing of it, but all of the things that I had discovered before that in watching so many coaches coaching and being able to kind of understand what was going on in my coaching as well as a result of watching them. So that was the first part of the question. And the second one is there another one that's emerging?
Yeah.
Yes, there's another one emerging already. And although I'm not sure that it's a book, it might be some other format. I haven't quite figured out what are people going to buy. Not that that's the be all and end all of writing a book, but you want to know that if you create something, somebody's going to use it. It's for our thinkers, to help our thinkers to come to coaching with a mindset that will help them to think well. So that's what I'm mulling over at the moment.
It could be the twin sister to Nancy Klein's book for the other person.
Yes. Well, and I think it's the twin sister to this one, honestly. You know, this is how the coach needs to show up, but how does the thinker need to show up in order to have a brilliant partnership? So something about how to enable the thinker to really step into their adult, as opposed to coming into this as a consumer or a student.
Yes.
A buyer of a service, which is, yes, they might be paying for it, but actually they have to do the hard work. So how do we enable them to show up in that way of expecting to do the hard work of thinking, and really putting the brain cycles to it, or it's not just brain cycles, because it's not just cerebral, but also being willing to listen to their body as well, which they probably don't expect. I'm sure most people who come into coaching don't expect to be calling on their body's wisdom as well as their mind's wisdom. But that's where much of our wisdom is, in our intuition. And we have lost that ability to do that. So it's somehow reclaiming that ability to, you're great, you are, you're helping me, I'm going to be jotting all this down afterwards in my book, my ideas for my book, accessing their intuition, which has been squashed.
Can I ask,
and
Claire,
many other things have been squashed over time, you know, creativity has been squashed. Those things. Sorry, Jayne.
Reclaiming their wisdom, isn't it? Reclaiming wisdom.
That's a nice title. I like that.
You can.
I was just curious as to where the idea came from. Is it because clients had asked you, Claire, for that, or is it something you'd noticed is a need out there?
Well, actually, hang on, I'm just writing down reclaiming your wisdom. Thank you for that, Gillian. I'll pay you later.
That's all right. You can mention me in your dedication.
Yes, there we go.
I'd be so excited about that. I would highlight it.
Sorry, Jayne, what was the question?
I was just wondering whether clients had asked you for advice, or how do I approach this, or whether it's something you just observed as a potential need in client groups out there.
Well, I think it's more that I hear coaches saying, oh, but my thinkers, they all turn out wanting me to be a mentor, not to be a coach. So that's part of what's informing But also at my book launch, one of the people who came said, "Have you got another book in you?" And I was like, "I'm kind of mulling it over. I'm not sure yet. Don't know. Inspiration hasn't struck." And she said, "Well, there's something really obvious to me, and it's this a book for thinkers." And I'm like, "Yeah, there's something in that." So, but I do think. So I was talking to an old colleague yesterday, and we used to do human-centered design work together. And I think I need to do a human-centered project to figure out whether my hypothesis that there is a need is actually true, because it might not be true at all. It might be the coach's need more than it is the thing. I think, and that's where I say I'm not sure if it would be a book that I would market to thinkers, or would it be a book for coaches to give to thinkers, or would it be something else for coaches to use with their thinkers? I'm still at early stages of thinking about that. But yes, I can't stop writing. I love writing. I'm just addicted.
Excellent.
Well, I suppose for those in the book club, yes, that's what we loved. Well, we all love reading. So,
yeah.
So please keep writing.
Yeah.
Keep doing it. Right, we've got 3 minutes left. I'm gonna ask this one from one of our members. So in shift 12, which was about not getting too big for your boots and a shift to owning your coaching strengths, you talked about realizing how much your hobbies influence the way we show up in coaching. How have your hobbies shown up in your coaching?
So one of my hobbies is painting. And so a bit like Tim talked about asking somebody to draw a picture, I will frequently ask people to draw something, because I just think that access is something that words cannot access. I practice yoga. So occasionally I might bring in some kind of breathing thing, especially if they're showing up straight from a meeting beforehand and it feels like we need a bit of grounding between the, maybe both of us need a bit of grounding to get us right into the room. So I might do some centering or grounding with them. So I have a dog and I like walking, and so often I will do walking coaching with people who are local. So that's another way that my hobbies inform my coaching. I'm sure I could come up with a lot more actually, but
what about your writing? I don't know if you think of that as a hobby or not, but how does that come into it?
So I do sometimes ask people if it would be useful to them to do some rush writing, for example. So I'll give them 3 minutes to write as much as they can without editing. Sorry, I don't give it to them. I invite them. Would it be useful to you to ... And then they decide whether they want to do it. And then I set the timer and they write for 3 minutes. And just like Tim's exercise, in 3 minutes, they have got so much that they have accessed from their subconscious that they wouldn't necessarily access if they were talking. Because when they're talking, they're editing and they're sense checking and they're saying stuff that they think is okay for me to hear. Whereas if they're rush writing, I'm not going to see what they're writing. It's not much. They say something they're ashamed of or think they might be judged on, because I'm not going to judge them. So that's a way that I would use writing. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you. It also strikes me that we could invite them to bring their own hobbies and interests in as well, couldn't we? How might they want to use the things that they like to do within the coaching itself, that it helps them express or illustrator, whatever.
Yeah, so I did work with somebody who was a painter, and one time I did say, would you like to paint this next time we're together? And she said, yeah, I would actually. And I'm going to bring my painting gear and have myself all set up ready. And so that's what she did.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, alas, we're at 3 o'clock, so we need to say farewell. But before we say farewell, bye, Kim. Thank you so much for coming. Before we say farewell, we just want to say a huge thank you. So a huge thank you to everybody that was able to come. A huge thank you to everybody who fed in questions. But most of all, a massive thank you to you, Clare, for giving up your time today and just being with us. I don't know, I'm sure everyone will be the same, but I've loved it. And just, you know, getting you all to ourselves, basically, and being able to, you know, talk to the person who wrote this. Yeah, completely in awe, and have loved it, and so grateful for the time that you have spent with us today. So thank you so much.
Oh, welcome. And all I ask in return, if you're willing, is that you write a review on Amazon and or on LinkedIn, because referrals are absolutely the best form of sales. So that would be great.
I'm sure that people will give that tiny little something back for given, especially how much we've got from you through the book. So I'm sure that people will be doing that. I, for one, certainly will. Just for those who are listening, the next meetup, which will be the second and final meetup for this particular book, is on Monday, the 5th of December. So that's 7 p.m. to 8:30 UK time. So look forward to seeing those of you who can make it then. And just thank you so much and goodbye.
Bye. Take care, everyone. Lovely to meet you, Tim.